Hey, Quad folks. Yeah, I got another one. Well, I must say at the outset here that this is, for me, a little unexpected and, of course, a very momentous occasion. As you can well imagine, it's not every day a person gets a VR-1000, and that's, you know, kind of where I am today. How I got here, well, that's kind of an interesting adventure. Several months ago, I was fortunate enough to be invited to participate in I guess a deaccession or a deacquisition of some holdings, and so my initial entry into that little safari was the video heads. I didn't really need any equipment, or wasn't really looking for any equipment. But there were a substantial number of 2-inch video heads in the collection, and being who I am and what I do, that interested me the most, but not in the way you might think. You know, the one way to really start a dogfight is to try to claim a good video head when there's 20 other people trying to claim the same head. And I didn't really want to do that, nor did I even need to do that. So initially, my interest in all this project was, I said, well, if there is a non-working video head, or a video head that nobody else wants, I will take it. And that seemed like a pretty safe ask, you know, because who wants a bad video head except me? And so we went on from there for 2 or 3 months, and as things progressed, these things came into the picture, and it was asked of me again, who do you think could do something with this sort of a thing, the VR-1000? I think there were 6 of these in their holdings, and none of them were complete, you know, just bits and pieces and various things. And my first impulse was to recommend a fellow that I know from out in the Midwest, Tom Ostertag. Now, Tom is he is a smart young man, I'll have to say, the smartest guy around that I know in this business, and second to none. And I think the first time I ever met him, about 10 years ago, one of the first things he asked or said was, "You know where I can find a VR-1000? Well, no, I didn't. So when this all came up, the first person that came to my mind was Tom, knowing that he had a long-term interest in finding one of these beasts. And so I was able to put his name in the hat, and he connected with the folks, and you know, the other person, which I didn't really have any input on, was a lady out in Los Angeles, which I've known for, it's probably 25 years, maybe, Charlena Johnson. And she had been a 1000 collector from way back. Only she had lost her 1000 in a fire here a couple years ago in the big LA fire, you know. Well, that took all of the work that she had done away just, you know, in one night. And that's bad. So Tom and Charlena, they were the 1000 folks, and so they had their name in the hat, you know, and I'm mainly in it for the non-working video heads. And they were going to get, I believe they were going to split up some of the presumed good video heads between the two of them. It's Mark III heads we're talking about now, nothing modern. Well, the idea occurred to me, you know, I'm sitting here rebuilding video heads, and I had a little bit of, well, I wouldn't go so far as to say training, but I've been around Bev Gooch for about 5 years, and you know, that's something that we had studied, or I had studied with him, the lineage or the development. And of course the Mark III was, you know, a big part of that later on, you know, when these things went into production, you know. So I did know something about Mark III construction, and I had a pretty good idea of, you know, how to do that. And so I said, well, if I can find a suitable test bed, I could probably help you guys out, you know, in the head department. Mainly because it's, well, you may think you have a good head until you actually put it on, and then you discover it's not so good. And if you're going to go to all the trouble and time to rebuild one of these, you know, to a factory spec, or as near as you can get, the one thing you need at the top of the list is you need a good video head. If you don't have that, you just have a big pile of scrap iron. because none of this works without a good video head. It's just something to look at, or a boat anchor, as some might say. Well, okay. So I put that suggestion out, and they had in their collection a VR-1100 that looked like it might fit the bill, for doing Mark III beta testing and a few other things. I have a VR-1100 here, but number one, my VR-1100 was not complete, and number two, it had been upgraded to a Mark X video head, and in order for that to work, the original preamp for the Mark III had to come out, and the Mark X head connector chassis had to go in. So I didn't have that part, the Mark III preamp. It was long gone. And I didn't have any books on the one I have. So that was kind of a long shot there, to do much with that. And after looking a little closer at the one in the collection there, it became apparent to me that some of the pieces that were missing on theirs were some of the pieces missing on mine. And their machine had been heavily modified, and of course there's no documentation there. So you're kind of in the dark again. Well, to ship that across country is, not cheap, a couple $1,000. And I didn't really feel like we could do anything, with what I had and what they had. And it would cost me a pile of money to find that out. And I didn't really want to take that risk or pay that bill, and come up with nothing. So I thought about it a while, and an idea occurred to me. And I went back to Tom and Charlena, and the person in charge of the collection there, and said, "Hey, you all have got 6 of these old 1000s, and if you're going to restore 1 each and use the other 4 for parts in your restoration, would there be a way possible to send me one of the stripped down frames that you're done with? You get everything you want off of it, and you're down to maybe a frame and a casting. And the only 2 things that I needed, in order to do the head work was I needed a casting that had not been converted. In other words, an original Mark III casting. And the casting needed to have the original Mark III preamp attached. So with that, you know, nothing else matters, you know, if you have those two pieces, I can build everything else around that, no problem. So that was kind of the, I guess the prerequisite for maybe getting the head rebuilding started was a frame with an original casting and preamp. Well, and wouldn't you know it, my friend Tom Ostertag stepped up, and he sent me this, what you're seeing here, which is a, can you bring your camera over in just a minute? And this is an original casting that's been unmodified. So this is a Mark III, just like it was in 1958. And this is not an air bearing, this is a ball bearing. You know, if you had an air bearing, there would be a hole drilled right here. So this predates the air bearing, and this has never had an air bearing kit installed. Very few, if any, upgrades have ever been done to this transport. Still has the original front race head. And if you notice over here, this is a original VR-1000 capstan. And now, this hole is the same in the transport. This shaft is much smaller than the later Ampex capstans that we probably are all used to seeing. You know, the 1100, the 1200, and the 2000. You know, its shaft was about 3 times this size. It was a big old, you know, much bigger around. This is reminiscent of the RCA capstan shaft, something like you would see in a TR3, 4, 22, 60, and a 70 or 70B. They had that skinny capstan, and on the bottom they had a really an oversized flywheel down below. So this is, you know, pretty much what it takes for me to do what I need to do as far as the Mark III head work. And, you know, when I was unpacking this and you know, opening things up, it's kind of a funny thing that if you're of a certain age, you know what this is. Do you know what that is, Don? My hands are too shaky.
Can't say that I do.
That's the top off of a cigarette pack.
Oh, I see it now.
This fell out of this machine. Now, this machine came from CBS Television City, as I'm told. And in fact, if you want to step around back, there's actually a CBS sticker on the back side there. See if you can shoot that for the folks at home.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is the serial number of this machine?
Well, the CBS number is a 12134.
What's the serial number of Ampex? It's on that metal tag there. It's around 300, isn't it? Somewhere in the 300 range.
Well, I think so, Larry. It's hard to see through the camera, but yeah, it looks like a 308 or something like that.
Now this is a VR-1000. It's not a B or a C, it's a 1000 according to the ID tag. And I believe that, you know, judging from the transport and the lack of upgrades. But, you know, I saw that little cigarette wrapper fall out of this thing, you know, and knowing it came from CBS, there's probably been untold thousands of cigarettes smoked in this thing's lifetime at CBS. Wouldn't you know? Anyway, I thought that was kind of funny. The first thing that fell out when I opened this thing up was a cigarette wrapper. Smoke them if you got them. Well, let's see, where were we? Oh yeah, the Mark III head building. Well, so we got that, and thanks mainly to my friend Tom Ostertag for really stepping up, you know, and you know, there's generosity, and then, you know, that's, to me, this goes far and above generosity. I mean, who would, you know, extend a VR-1000 to someone? You know, so I'm forever in Tom's debt, and you know, for that gesture. And while we're on the subject of generosity, I'd like to also extend and convey my deepest appreciation to the organization that made all this possible for us, and me, myself, and the others. And in doing that, there is a way, as I learned, that we have to go about this, because they have rules and regulations. And so I asked, and to make sure I didn't get this wrong, I printed it out. So I will read it verbatim here. Quote, "This equipment was donated generously by an institution of higher learning," unquote. And it was. That's very true. And so, to that institution of higher learning, you have my undying gratitude for your generosity. And, you know, one thing that they stipulated in giving this stuff away, and I'm not the only one, let me make that clear, I'm one of many people in the archiving and the preservation world that were recipients of some of this equipment. One of their, I guess, asks or prerequisites in giving all this stuff to us folks was that we do something productive and constructive with it that will benefit and further the preservation efforts and the archiving world at large. And so I guess this is my little contribution. What I'll do here is I'll be helping out Tom and Charlena, and well, if somebody else has a 1000, you know, and their head needs, video head needs, because I think if you were to ask a head tech, the chances of them rebuilding a Mark III is slim and none. And if they did agree to rebuild a Mark III, I would hate to ask what the price would be. You know, it's much more involved. The head drum is much more involved than a Mark 10, a Mark 15, or a Mark 20 head drum. Much more involved. So, well, there's not much chance of that ever happening. Prove me wrong. That's kind of what I think, you know. And if it did happen, it would be so expensive, you know. So, no. That's not happening, I don't think. But, you know, I can do it here at home and, you know, on the cheap, and, you know, that's a way out, you know, of the head conundrum for these folks that are, you know, rebuilding the other 1000s. Now, along that line, you know, to, well, go down that road a little further, in order for me to make that happen, I've got to make this happen. In other words, this thing has got to run, you know. Well, how do you do that in 2026? Well, you're not going to do it with this, because that is a finite amount. There's not enough of that left in the world to make a complete tube-type machine. And what there is between Tom and Charlena. They are going to try to do that. You know, so they're going to need all of this stuff they can find to make that happen. So where does that leave me in all this? Well, back in the day, there were, you know, many TV stations had these. And as the technology advanced and things progressed, Ampex would come out with upgrades, you know, so you could keep up with the advancing technology. And many TV stations did just that, because believe me, the last thing a little TV station out in, you know, a small market wanted to do was buy another VTR. You know, they ran the ones they had till they just couldn't run them no more. At least that's been my experience where I came from, in this little one-horse market. So, there were, you know, as you went later on into the 60s, it became possible to upgrade one of these consoles almost to the point of a VR-1200, you know, by the mid-late 60s when the 1200 was out. And that means all the tube racks and all the vacuum tubes can go, and you would populate your frame with VR-1200 electronics. Or if you didn't do the Ampex route with the 1200, there was another company that, Allen Electronics, were offering the same kit. You could upgrade your 1000, to solid state and get rid of the tubes. And that's what a lot of people did in the late 60s, early 70s even. When I first came to Channel 11 here in town, 11 had one of those updated 1000s, just like this. Now, what they were using theirs for at that time was they would make brake tapes. Now, that was the machine that played the brake tapes on the air, commercial brakes. That was done away with when they got their TCR 100. And that's when I came there, is when they had their TCR 100. In fact, that was my first job on the night shift, was learning how to operate the TCR 100 and dub commercials to cart. If any of you go back that far, you know what that's all about. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it seemed like the old 1000 was still, it was out in the studio behind the sight curtain for a while. And when I first came there, and I think that one was shipped off to our sister station in Utica, New York. I think WUTR is a UHF in Utica. I think that's right. It's been a long time. That's over 40 years ago. But anyway, a lot of stations did that. So it's not really a far-fetched idea for me to try something with this thing along those same lines, seeing how I have all of those pieces sitting here to do that with, including even a couple of wiring harnesses from a 1200. So it's not that far-fetched of an idea, to rework this thing, build it into a 1200 essentially, and keep the original Mark III transport and preamp. Now, along that line, another idea occurred, a possibility that I looked into was, one day I got to noticing some of these holes here in this transport and the frame, and I think Tom had pointed this piece out to me early on as being unusual, and as you know, the original head cover would be a big full-length thing here that raised up on a hinge. And thinking this over, looking at this and thinking about these holes here, that is for a editor shelf that somebody, presumably I suppose CBS, had added this on to attach a shelf here And what that shelf held was an editor. Where's our editor? Here it is. This is an old razor blade splicer, and see, that's the same size. So it would set if you had a, let's get this up here for a little bit of reference. So there we got our Mark III head sitting in its position. And if you had a shelf here, then you would want the splicer to be right there, even with the top of this. And what the editor would do would be mark it with a grease pencil, pull it off, go right here, whack it with a razor blade, go on to the next one. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody looked in the CBS archives online. There's probably a photograph of just that, what I described here. An editor arrangement, you know, where you have a splicer right here at the video head, you know, where the guy would take his pencil and mark a mark on the tape, pull it off, cut it, tape it, put it back on, go to the next one. Well, in thinking of all of that, you know, and thinking all this over, it occurred to me, if I'm going to upgrade this to a 1200, well, we may want to put a Mark X head on this at some time or the other. You know, because really a Mark III is not anything you want to do any serious archiving work with. Another thing you don't want to even consider is this, a front side erase head. You know, that is a tape scratcher right there, and that's one thing you do not want to do, you know, in preservation and archiving work, is to have a front side erase head. That's asking for trouble there. So, in thinking about that, well, how could I make this accept a Mark X and a Mark III? Well, I have the VR-1100, which had been upgraded to a Mark X, which I had mentioned previously. Unfortunately, I can't backward, you know, adapt that because the original preamp is gone. But I looked through my junk pile, and what do you know? I have another casting. Now this came from an original VR-1100. That an old gentleman up in Minnesota sent me years ago. And as you notice, this was machined for a Mark III. And there you have no hole for the air bearing supply. This one, the pilot holes have been drilled and countersunk, so this one did have a guide servo gear motor on it. It would not be much problem at all for me to drill and tap the holes here for a air bearing air supply. And At that point, we have a functioning dual head or a dual capability transport. The nice thing about Ampex, this casting did not change that much over the years. This casting will bolt into this frame. These motors are the same motors that are used in an AVR-2. These hubs, these motors, same thing. These have been changed, by the way. You know, so these are not actually the original 1958 motors, you know, that came with it. They probably went bad or burned up, or, you know, a bearing went bad. So these, over the years of use, have both been changed with later motors. And, you know, if you remember that early, the first version of the AVR-2 was a flat deck design that used the very same hubs, same motors. And also, in that same regard, the AVR-2 mirrors this casting in the sense that it used rib reinforcement, which are, you know, just long pieces of thick aluminum that are bolted to the bottom and the top edge. So there's a lot of, you know, mechanical resemblance between a VR-1000 casting and an AVR-2 casting. The big difference there is, of course, the Mark 15 head. They had a larger connector here, so you have a longer hole in the casting to accommodate the Mark 15 connector. Other than that, the differences are minor, you know. And the same applies for a VR-1100, you know, or 1200 or 2000. That casting did not change that much over the years. Minor differences, you know, but they're, you know, for the most part interchangeable. Now, what that amounts to, all of this, you know, is this. And I had a conversation with Tom about this because, you know, this came from him, and as far as I'm concerned, it's still his machine. I'm just kind of the custodian of it for a while. We agreed to not deface or change or drill any holes in the original parts, you know, because once you do that, there's no going back. It's not original anymore. So, you know, that's the reasoning behind some of this substitution, you know, to facilitate and accommodate the upgrade, you know, to bring this thing back and get it running again. Is we didn't want to add any more injury to, you know, what's already here by drilling a hole or something like that if we didn't have to. So that's our workaround. I'm going to, you know, use the 1100 casting, and we'll remove this one and just keep it as is, original. And so anyway, that's, I guess, to kind of sum this up. that's the project. And, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing for me. I've never done this before. And in a way, it's going to help out Tom and Charlena, you know, maybe in the short run or the long run, because, well, there's no really way to know if any of their heads are good. You know, that's a big question mark. And I remember a young fellow coming to me one time from far away. He brought 6 video heads with him, thinking that some of them may be good, but no, all 6 of them were bad. They had something wrong with each one of them. So there's nothing written in stone that any of their heads are any good. You know, what would benefit them, I think the most, going into their projects would be if they knew that their heads were good. And the way to do that is to test them. Well, you gotta have something to test them on, you know, before you can have any degree of confidence in how good or bad the head is. And so I think I can check that box for them by doing this little project, is to provide them a way and a means to test their video heads. Because can you imagine rebuilding one of their machines, all these tubes, trying to get it running with a video head that you're not sure is operating correctly? You know, you could run around in circles for weeks and months chasing your tail, thinking it's something else when it could be a bad head. So that was the thought that came to my mind, you know, early on, and, you know, when all of this came up as well. Really, you need a way to test these heads, you know, before you start trying to use them and rebuild your VTR. You know, it'd make life quite a bit easier later on if they have that confidence, you know, in the heads that they have. So, yeah, that kind of gave me a purpose, I guess. Before we close here, I want to say, if you haven't, or if you're not familiar with Tom Ostertag, I encourage you to go out to his YouTube channel and check him out. He's, you know, a TV guy, and he's into everything, and I know you'll find some of his work interesting. And as he gets into his project of rebuilding his VR-1000, you can follow Tom along, you know, as his project progresses. And also, you can go out to Charlena Johnson's YouTube channel and check her out, you know, with her postings on her project's progress as she rebuilds her VR-1000. I don't think, I haven't looked that much, but from what I have looked online, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, there is literally nothing, I mean zero, nothing out online of, you know, actual work with these machines. Now there's a lot of photographs, you know, from 50, 60 years ago that's been used and reused to death, you know, till we've seen all of that stuff. As far as any video, you know, documenting or operating these machines, the only one that I know of is the MBT boys up in Rhode Island. Their tour video, they have about, I don't know, about a minute in their video presentation of them turning on their 1000. So it was very, very, very scant, very limited, you know. And I think they just turned it on and wound and rewound and pushed play a couple times, and that was it. There's nothing ever been done in depth to this degree that I think we three are about to attempt. So in that regard, this may be something new, you know, as far as content and learning, you know, and that kind of thing. So check out Charlena and Tom when you get a chance, and I'll drop a link in the description below. And so till we meet again, have a good day.